For me, that moment wasn't a car accident, or a diagnosis, or even a death. It was a Tuesday morning in a cold courtroom under humming fluorescent lights when my older sister stood up, looked the judge straight in the eye, and said, with the calmest voice I had ever heard, "Your Honor, my sister is mentally unstable. She always has been." The room went quiet, and I sat there, hands folded in my lap, heart pounding so loud I was sure the court reporter could hear it, and I thought to myself, how did we get here? How did the girl who used to braid my hair and sneak me candy after bedtime become the woman who just tried to bury me in front of a judge? Let me take you back, because this story doesn't start in that courtroom. It starts in a house full of secrets, a family full of silence, and a childhood I spent trying to earn love that should have been given to me for free. My name is Lila. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in a mid-sized city with my parents and my older sister Nadia, who is 4 years older than me. To the outside world, we were a normal family. My father worked in finance, my mother ran the home with military precision, every surface clean, every meal on time, every emotion carefully tucked away where no one could see it. We went to church on Sundays, we smiled at the neighbors, we wore our best clothes to family dinners. But inside that house, there was a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. Nadia was my parents' golden child, not because she was smarter or kinder or more deserving, but simply because she came first. She was their firstborn, their proof of success. Everything she did was celebrated. Everything I did was compared to her and always found slightly lacking. Why can't you be more focused like your sister? Nadia had straight A's at your age. You're too emotional, Lila. You need to toughen up. Too emotional. That phrase followed me like a shadow my entire childhood. Whenever I cried, which I did because I was a child and children cry, I was told I was being dramatic. Whenever I expressed fear or sadness, I was told I was overreacting. Whenever I said something wasn't fair, I was told I was imagining things. I was 8 years old the first time someone in my family called me crazy. It was my aunt at a birthday party when I got upset that Nadia was given a bigger piece of cake. Everyone laughed. There goes dramatic Lila again. I laughed too, because that's what you do when you're 8 and you don't understand yet that the joke being told is on you. Growing up, Nadia and I weren't close, not really. We shared a hallway, shared dinners, shared holidays, but we didn't share secrets, we didn't share dreams. I always wanted a sister who felt like a best friend. What I had instead was a sister who felt like a supervisor. Nadia was watchful, precise. She had a way of noticing things, your weak points, your soft spots, and filing them away, not to use immediately, just to keep for later. I didn't understand that about her until I was much, much older. When I was 18, I left for college 3 states away. It was the first time in my life I felt like I could breathe. I made friends, I studied hard, I fell in love with literature and long walks, and the radical idea that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I'd been told. I graduated with honors. I built a career in marketing. I got an apartment of my own, then a better one. I dated, I healed, I grew. And slowly, carefully, I began to find my footing. But here's the thing about family. No matter how far you run, no matter how much you heal, they still have a way of pulling you back, especially when something valuable is suddenly on the table. My grandmother, my father's mother, passed away when I was 29. Her name was Ruth, and she was the one member of my family who had always been in my corner. She used to call me her wild little flame. She said I had too much heart for a world that didn't always deserve it. When Ruth died, I was devastated. She was 81 and had lived a full life, but grief doesn't care about logic. I cried for weeks. I drove 16 hours to be at her funeral, standing at her graveside in the November cold. missing her with everything I had. What I didn't know, what no one told me, was that before she died, Grandma Ruth had changed her will. She had left the majority of her estate, her house, her savings, and a piece of land on the edge of town worth a considerable amount of money, to me. Not to Nadia, not split equally between the two of us, to me, alone. And that single fact, that one quiet act of love from a woman already gone, set off a chain of events that would end with my sister standing in a courtroom, calling me insane. I found out about the will 3 weeks after the funeral. The family attorney called me directly, explained the terms, and asked me to come in to sign the paperwork. I was stunned. I cried again, but differently this time. Ruth had seen me. She had chosen me. Even after everything, she had chosen me. I made one mistake. I called Nadia to tell her before the paperwork was signed. Not to gloat, not to rub it in. I called her because, even then, even after everything, some part of me still wanted us to be sisters. I thought maybe if I was honest with her, if I was open, we could navigate this together like adults. She was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, I'll talk to you later, Lila." She hung up, and the war began. The first move Nadia made was subtle, elegant even. That was always her style. She never came at you directly. She circled, she whispered, she planted seeds in the dark and waited for them to grow. Within days of my phone call, I started getting messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, cousins, aunts, my mother's sister who lived 2 time zones away, all of them saying some version of the same thing. "Are you okay, Lila? We've been hearing some things." "What things?" I asked. "Well, Nadia mentioned you've been going through a hard time, mentally." There it was. Nadia had gone to every corner of our extended family and quietly, carefully begun constructing a story. Not a dramatic story, not a scandalous one, just a gentle, concerned older sister story. Lila hasn't been well. She's been struggling. We're all worried about her. This inheritance has stirred something up in her. We just hope she gets the help she needs. It was brilliant, honestly, if you were cruel enough to admire it. Because she wasn't accusing me of anything. She wasn't making wild claims. She was simply expressing concern, the kind of concern that makes everyone else nod along and say, "Poor thing," the kind of concern that makes people look at you just a little differently next time they see you, the kind of concern that, if planted early enough and watered consistently, can slowly, quietly make everyone around you question your reality. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it would blow over. I told myself that the will was legally airtight, that I had nothing to worry about, that Nadia was just reacting out of jealousy and it would pass. But it didn't pass. 2 months after the will was read, I received a legal notice. Nadia, along with my father, who had apparently decided to take her side entirely, had filed a formal challenge to Grandma Ruth's will. Their claim? That Ruth had been unduly influenced by me in her final years, that I had manipulated a frail old woman into changing her estate documents, that the bequest to me was the result of my emotional manipulation of someone who was no longer fully capable of sound judgment. I read that document sitting on my kitchen floor. I read it 3 times. Then I put it down and stared at the wall for a very long time. Unduly influenced, emotional manipulation. This was Grandma Ruth they were talking about, a woman who raised 6 children, managed a household for 60 years, and until the very last months of her life could recite scripture from memory, balance her own checkbook, and beat anyone in the family at Scrabble. They were going to stand up in court and call her mentally diminished, and they were going to call me the manipulator. I felt something shift inside me that night, something cold and very, very clear. If this was how it was going to be, then I was going to fight. I hired an attorney, a good one. Her name was Sandra Voss, and she was the kind of woman who wore sensible shoes and never raised her voice and somehow still made everyone in the room feel slightly afraid of her. I liked her immediately. Sandra listened to everything: the family dynamics, the will, the whisper campaign, the legal filing. She took careful notes. When she finished, she set down her pen and said, "Lila, I want to be honest with you. Cases like this are often less about the law and more about perception. They're going to try to paint a picture of you. We need to make sure the picture they paint doesn't stick." She was right, and what she didn't say, but what I heard clearly, was that they already had a head start. Because Nadia hadn't just been talking, she had apparently been doing something far more calculated. She had been collecting. Over the years, quietly, patiently, she had been saving things. Old text messages where I'd been upset, emails where I'd expressed frustration, a brief period in my late 20s when I had seen a therapist for anxiety, something I had never hidden, never been ashamed of, and somehow Nadia had gotten her hands on a reference to it. Nothing specific, nothing that could actually be used, but enough to wave around. Enough to say, see, she has a history. The months leading up to the court date were the hardest of my life. I want to be honest with you about that, because this kind of story, a revenge story, a justice story, sometimes gets told like the protagonist is strong the whole way through, like they never crack, like they march toward the finish line with fire in their eyes and certainty in their chest. That wasn't me. There were nights I lay awake at 3 in the morning genuinely questioning myself. Not the will, not the facts, but myself, my memories, the version of events I had always believed. Because that's what sustained gaslighting does to a person. It makes you doubt your own mind. It makes you wonder if maybe they're right, if maybe you are too emotional, too dramatic, too unstable. I would lie there in the dark and hear my mother's voice from 20 years ago, "You're overreacting, Lila." And I would think, what if I always have? Those were the nights I had to work the hardest, not to fight Nadia, but to stay anchored to what I knew was true. I knew who I was. I knew how much I had loved Ruth. I knew the thousands of hours I had spent with her in her final years, visiting her, calling her, sitting on her porch drinking sweet tea and talking about everything and nothing. Those weren't the visits of a manipulator. They were the visits of a granddaughter who showed up when no one else did. I held on to that. 2 weeks before the court date, something happened that changed everything. Sandra called me, and for the first time since I'd hired her, she sounded something other than controlled. She sounded almost excited. "Lila," she said, "I need you to come in. I found something." What she had found, buried in the estate documents, overlooked by everyone, including Nadia's own legal team, was a letter written by Grandma Ruth, dated 14 months before her death, notarized, signed, and addressed specifically to whoever might one day question why I made the choices I made. Ruth had anticipated this. She had known her family well enough to know that someone might challenge her decision, and she had written in her own careful handwriting exactly why she had chosen to leave her estate to me. The letter was 4 pages long. It was specific, it was lucid, it was devastating. Sandra and I sat across from each other as I read it, and by the time I finished, I was crying so hard I couldn't see the page. "Is this enough?" I asked. Sandra smiled, really smiled, for the first time. "It's more than enough," she said. "Now let them call you crazy." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I don't know what I had imagined. Something grander, maybe. Something that matched the size of what had been done to me. But it was just a room. Rows of wooden benches, an elevated bench at the front, the quiet, procedural hum of justice being slowly processed. Nadia sat on the other side of the aisle with my father and their attorney. She was dressed impeccably. Of course she was. Dark blazer, hair pulled back, the picture of composed reasonableness. She didn't look at me when I walked in, not once. My father looked at the floor. I took my seat beside Sandra and folded my hands in my lap. I breathed. I thought of Ruth. "I'm here," I told her silently. I showed up, like I always did. The early part of the hearing went as expected. Nadia's attorney laid out their case, the claim of undue influence, the suggestion of Ruth's diminished capacity, the implication of my manipulation. They were careful, professional. They never used the word crazy outright. That came later. That came from Nadia herself. When she was called to speak, she stood up with the quiet confidence of someone who believed, genuinely believed, she had already won. She spoke about our family with measured sadness. She talked about Ruth's final years with practiced grief. And then, when asked to describe her concerns about me specifically, she paused, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Your Honor, I love my sister, I truly do, but Lila has always struggled with her emotional stability. She has a history of erratic behavior and distorted thinking. I believe she is mentally unstable, and I believe she used that instability to form an unhealthy attachment to our grandmother that ultimately influenced Ruth's decisions." The room was still. I kept my hands folded. I kept my breathing even. I did not look away from the middle distance I had chosen as my anchor point. And then Sandra stood up for cross-examination. She approached Nadia calmly. She asked a few preliminary questions, clarifying the timeline, establishing the facts, and then she paused, let the silence stretch for just a moment too long, and asked, "Ms. Nadia, you've described your sister as mentally unstable and suggested her judgment cannot be trusted. In your opinion, would you say that a person with those qualities is someone Grandma Ruth would have chosen to spend her final years with?" Nadia blinked. What do you mean?" "It's a simple question," Sandra said, her voice perfectly pleasant. "You're telling this court your sister is unstable, but the evidence shows that your grandmother, a woman you describe as being of sound mind and strong character, chose Lila's company over and over again, specifically requested her visits, wrote her letters, called her weekly. If Lila is as unstable as you claim, what does that say about Ruth's judgment?" The air shifted. Nadia opened her mouth, closed it. Her attorney shifted in his seat. "Because," Sandra continued, turning slightly toward the judge, "you can't have it both ways. Either Ruth was a sharp, capable woman whose choices deserve to be honored, including her choice to spend her time with Lila, and her choice about her estate, or Ruth was not in full command of her faculties, in which case your entire case rests on the testimony of someone you've just admitted may not have been reliable." She paused once more. "Which is it, Ms. Nadia?" The judge, a quiet man named the Honorable Douglas Mercer, who had said very little up until that point, leaned forward. He removed his glasses, he looked at Nadia directly, and he asked in a voice that carried no drama but somehow filled the entire room, "Do you have any documented medical or psychological evidence to support your claim that your sister is mentally unstable? Any professional assessment? Any clinical record?" Nadia's composure, so carefully constructed, so long maintained, cracked. Just slightly, just around the edges. "No, Your Honor, not formally, but our family has always—" "That's sufficient," he said quietly, and he put his glasses back on. Sandra then submitted Grandma Ruth's letter into evidence. The judge read it in full. No one spoke. The courtroom held its breath. When he set it down, he looked up, not at Nadia, not at their attorney, but at me, and something in his expression made my eyes fill with tears. Not sadness, not relief, exactly, something quieter than both. Recognition. He saw me. After all of it, the whisper campaign, the legal filings, the courtroom accusations, someone in a position of power looked at me and saw the truth. The ruling took 10 days to come through officially, but Sandra said she knew the moment he set down that letter. The will was upheld, in full. The challenge was dismissed. Ruth's clear, lucid, notarized wishes stood exactly as she had written them. Nadia did not speak to me after the verdict. She gathered her things, walked past me without a glance, and left. My father paused for just a moment near the door. He looked like he might say something. I watched him make the decision not to. I let him go. I stood outside the courthouse that afternoon in pale winter sunlight, and Sandra squeezed my arm and said, "Go get a good meal, you've earned it." I laughed. It felt strange in my chest, a little rusty, like something that had been stored away for too long, but it was real. I went home, I made tea, I sat by my window, and I thought about Ruth. I thought about all the Sunday afternoons on her porch, all the times she had pressed my face between her warm palms and said, "You are not too much, my girl, you are exactly enough." I thought about the fact that she had known somehow, that one day I would need protection even from beyond her own life. So she wrote it down. She made it permanent. She refused to let her love for me be erased. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's someone who saw you clearly and chose you anyway. I want to tell you something before I close this story. I am not going to stand here and tell you I came out of this without scars, because I didn't. There are things you don't fully recover from. Having your own family try to dismantle your reputation, having the people who were supposed to protect you become the ones you need protection from. Those things leave marks, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. But here is what I know now, on the other side of it. Being called unstable by people who benefit from your instability is not a diagnosis, it is a strategy. And the moment you understand that, the moment you stop internalizing their narrative and start documenting your truth, everything shifts. Because they rely on you doubting yourself. The entire operation depends on you being too confused, too hurt, too ashamed to stand up and say, "No, I know what happened. I was there. I was there. I knew what Ruth meant to me. I knew how I had loved her. I knew that the inheritance wasn't a manipulation, it was an acknowledgement of years of showing up, of choosing presence over comfort, of being the granddaughter who drove 16 hours in November and stood at the graveside and cried without shame. You cannot be too emotional for the people who love you, only for the people who don't. And the people who don't, the ones who use your emotions against you, who weaponize your sensitivity, who file your tears away as evidence, those people are not your family. They may share your blood, they may have your grandmother's eyes or your father's hands, but they are not your family. Family is Ruth, pressing your face in her palms. Family is Sandra, steady and prepared, handing you back your name. Family is the judge who read 4 pages of a dead woman's handwriting and saw, without a single word from me, exactly what kind of person I was. I still have the letter, Ruth's letter. I had it framed, actually. It hangs in my hallway now, just beside the front door. So every time I leave my home, I pass her words. I never get tired of reading them. She called me her wild little flame. She said she hoped the world never put me out. It didn't, Grandma Ruth. It tried, but it didn't.